Hello and welcome to the Women in Tech series powered by Bird & Bird. In this podcast series, we will hear interesting stories from people leading the charge at the forefront of innovation. My name is James Baillieu and I'm a partner in Bird & Bird's corporate group based here in London. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrea Wu, Chief Executive Officer of Urban Airport, also based in London. Hi Andrea, and welcome to our session.
Hi James, and thank you very much for welcoming me to your podcast series. I'm very excited to share the latest insights and share some experience in my career.
Wonderful. Well, look, you're the CEO of Urban Airport, the developer of the world's first vertiport for electrical vertical takeoff and landing, or eVTOL as it's known in industry jargon. Tell me about your career journey to date and how it led to the position you're in now.
Yeah, so I started my career over 20 years ago in architecture. So my passion was improving our built environment, looking and understanding cities, and I was very fortunate to be taught by the masters of what we call high-tech architecture. So these include Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, Nicholas Grimshaw. They all started the high-tech architecture movement in the UK. And they taught me how to look at cities, how to think about innovation, how to integrate transport modes and look at new transport modes, and to better connect cities and to really understand how can we improve the well-being for everyone. And I think that then taught me how to look at different sectors. I was fortunate to work on big regeneration projects such as Battersea Power Station, which looked at a completely new sector in South London. I looked at and worked closely on Wembley Masterplan. So how do you look at a very poor area in London? But also working more recently a lot in aviation, working at different transport sectors. And then that almost naturally moved towards advanced air mobility. And we started working in 2017 in this sector. And since then, we've been pioneers in looking at how to provide infrastructure for this new mode of transportation, which we call air taxis and cargo drones.
That's interesting. How would you describe your mission within the advanced air mobility field over at Urban Airport? And what do you want to achieve?
Yeah, we started out as 6 miles across London. So looking at our cities and thinking of how can we understand and introduce more sustainable modes of transportation. And I think with that in mind, we see our mission to enable greener modes of transportation. So in the case of advanced air mobility, it is really trying for the eVTOL sector to take off. But what does that actually mean? It means we have to integrate eVTOL takeoff and landing platforms in cities. We have to make sure that from an energy perspective, it's not just a greenwash. How do we really provide the required energy and make sure it comes from a greener source, ideally? And how do we also really make sure it is not just a mode of transportation for the wealthy? There's been lots of criticism around it. And how can we really say, okay, it is a mode of transportation that is complementary, and it should be accessible, ideally, for most of the public.
Absolutely. So when you step back, what are you seeing as the main opportunities and challenges within the advanced air mobility space?
So the industry has been very interesting. So we've been working, like I said, since 2017, which for advanced air mobility is a long time. So it comes up to 8-9 years. There has been lots of excitement, I would say. And over the past probably 3 years, I think challenges have become, in a way, almost harder to overcome. So these challenges include not only certification, so mainly focused on the OEMs who have been trying very hard to hit these target dates. So we know about Paris Olympics next year when Volocopter is supposed to fly. Vertical Aerospace intends to have their first flights at Farnborough next summer. And then the year after, it will be Joby and Archer in the US. Funding has been a massive challenge for everyone. I think because of different things, I guess, in our global markets, there has been a slowdown in the amount of funding going into the OEMs. But I think most importantly, from our perspective as infrastructure providers, there has been very little, almost no funding going into vertiports. But the same what happened with vehicles. So first you need roads, and then vehicles come. We need infrastructure. We need the appropriate type of infrastructure for eVTOLs to land and to take off, to provide a safe environment for passengers. and there's been no focus at all. And I think that's where we come in when we say the OEMs, they will certify at some point, whether it will be next year or the year after. I think in the next 2 years, we'll see a lot of movement. But when they're ready to go, we need infrastructure in place. And infrastructure takes a long time to integrate. It needs to be tested and it needs to be accepted by cities. And I think that is really our mission, where we say there are challenges. Challenges can be overcome, but it does take a lot of stakeholders, I think, to push this industry forward.
And what are you seeing as the main challenges and opportunities for women within the air mobility field?
I think because it's a completely new industry, on paper, there are lots of opportunities, like with anything new. You know, new companies have been founded on a new mission, new ideas. It is very futuristic still, I think, for most people to think that at some point there will be unmanned air taxis flying around. And I think for women, I guess like with many other industries, you know, I've worked so long in construction and architecture and aviation. It's a very male-dominated field. I think urban air mobility or advanced air mobility is very similar. There are lots of engineers, but I think for women, it's a good time to kind of carve out a new niche. But I think that goes for women or any other minorities, and I think it's a good time because the industry is very very new. There's a long roadmap, I think, in front of us. So, you know, like with any infrastructure, it takes decades, I think, to really get going. And I would definitely encourage women to join, you know, to support this new industry, because there's a lack of women in this industry.
Absolutely. So looking forward, what are you hoping to achieve at Urban Airport over the, say, next 3 to 5 years? What would be the wonderful end point for your business?
But we've been focusing in the past year on our next gen, as we call it. So we had the world's first fully operational vertiport in Coventry last year, and then it was, you know, our kind of main milestone to create something very technical and something that can be commercialized. Whereas Coventry was a proof of concept. You know, we showcased it to the world, and there was a big focus on trying to get the public behind that new industry. And I think the last year has really been about, okay, how can we understand that we create this disruptive technology or technology driven infrastructure that provides the level of safety that is required, a good passenger experience, but that also looks at maximizing throughput. We understand cities, so we really need to think hard, you know, where in essence, where can you find, you know, 2 hectares of land available to supply or deploy a conventional vertiport? And the reality is cities don't really work like that. Most successful cities are built on a dense model. It's all about compact living. And I think that is where we come in, because we think, you know, the more compact the footprint, the more sustainable it is. We're thinking about, you know, all the net carbon targets that we have to comply with from different governments. I think that is, we would really like to build a next gen within the next 2 to 3 years, and have one of the main eVTOL companies really testing it. So, you know, forget about taking off from a conventional vertiport that includes a small terminal building, a very traditional approach, and lots of tarmac. We would like somebody to take off, apart from our cargo drones that we showcase, a passenger eVTOL to take off at height and to show that it's safer, that impacts on downwash and outwash are mitigated, and that also from an acoustic perspective, you know, environmental impacts are a big issue. The more noisy it will be, I guess the less flights will be approved. So it's a big package that we are trying to address, and we are hopeful that we can do this with an OEM partner.
Sounds very exciting. I, for one, am looking forward to seeing you progress that business over the next few years. What challenges have you seen as you develop your business from recent geopolitical events, including, for example, COVID-19?
Yeah, we did. We designed Air One, so the vertiport that we opened last year during COVID. So I think that was a first for us. Our background is design and technology, And it's all about sitting together in big teams and delivering together. So I think COVID was a big challenge. Since COVID, I guess the whole kind of working environment has changed. For me, the biggest challenge that came out of COVID and other things that have been happening recently is the challenge of securing funding. Because I think it all goes back to that. It's not really that the technology isn't there, but it does take a lot of time to create something completely new. And I think that is where lots of OEMs have been struggling. And in my opinion, the ones that will be able to kind of complete the marathon, unfortunately, are probably the ones who have big backers behind them. So that is what it looks like, the only way for people to really get through these challenges. And it's really down to, will people get sufficient funding next year? Will people get sufficient funding the year after? And then I think from an infrastructure perspective, less funding is required. We don't need a 2 billion, like an OEM program to create our infrastructure. But of course, infrastructure is costly and people have been very risk averse, to say the least. And it doesn't only impact our sector. There's obviously been a big challenge from a financial perspective, but I think it all comes down to money in the end, because regulatory bodies, local authorities, the public, they all can come together to push this forward, but it is a costly operation.
And finally, what advice would you give other budding entrepreneurs aspiring to follow a similar trajectory to yourself?
I think my advice would be one has to be very flexible. I think it's all about flexibility, adapting to what the industry tells one, because it's easy kind of to come up with a business plan. But because this industry doesn't exist, there's so many parameters that keep on changing on a daily basis. And one has to move and change very quickly with these moving targets. I think so there's no right way of doing it, but it's almost that organically we have to adapt with what the rest of the world is doing, if that makes sense. I think that's my best advice. And that's what I've learned over the last 3 years is you need obviously lots of energy. You need very thick skin and cannot be disheartened easily. And then I think being confident in what one does, but at the same time also being very open to suggestions and maybe thinking, okay, we need to diversify. We've been focusing on this, but this isn't working. So let's think outside of the box and try something new. And also, I think a big lessons learned is don't wait for opportunities to come. I think if we would have waited for opportunities to come, we wouldn't be here anymore. So we are constantly on a daily basis creating our own opportunities, understanding what is the market doing? What do we think does the market need? Nobody has asked us, but we are just creating these opportunities and trying to sell. And I think, some work, some won't work. But while we're doing it, something else comes up, and it's a very kind of fluid way of moving forward. So it's definitely not a straight line of this planned roadmap, but it has been very exciting. And I think the next couple of years will be very interesting for the industry. Definitely believe that one of the big leading OEMs will fly. This might just be for show at the beginning. But I think once passengers have gone on board of an eVTOL and have flown and everybody is kind of behind it, I think that will be the time then when the industry has great potential to just proceed at a much faster speed.
Absolutely. Well, I, for one, I'm looking forward to seeing that happen. Thank you so much for joining us again today, Andrea. It was great to hear about your mission and much of your advice as well. A big thank you to all our listeners as well. Look out for more great content coming from the Women in Tech series powered by Bird & Bird.
Thank you very much, James.